Eleanor Hartwell pressed her face against the cold window glass of her family's tiny apartment. Snow fell heavy outside, covering the dirty streets of Philadelphia in a blanket that would soon turn to gray slush. She pulled her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. The coal stove had gone out hours ago, and she couldn't afford to buy more coal. Her stomach rumbled loudly in the quiet room. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and even that was just a piece of stale bread she'd found in the kitchen. The cupboards were empty now. Everything was empty. Eleanor walked to the small wooden table where bills were scattered like fallen leaves. Each piece of paper told the same story: money owed, payments overdue, final notices. Her father's funeral had been 3 weeks ago, but the debts he left behind seemed to grow bigger every day. The landlord had been patient, but his patience was running out fast. She picked up a letter that had arrived that morning. The handwriting was neat and official. Her hands shook as she read it again. The owner of the building wanted his money by the end of the week, or she would have to leave. Where would she go? She had no family left in the city, no friends who could help her. Eleanor walked to the small mirror hanging on the wall. The face looking back at her was thin and pale. Her brown hair, once shiny and well-kept, now looked dull and lifeless. She was only 22 years old, but the past month had aged her years. Still, her eyes held a spark of determination that refused to die. She moved to the trunk at the foot of her bed and opened it slowly. Inside were the last few things she owned: a simple blue dress, a worn pair of boots, and at the bottom, wrapped in soft cloth, her grandmother's gold locket. Eleanor lifted it carefully, feeling its weight in her palm. The locket was beautiful, with tiny flowers carved into the gold surface. Inside was a picture of her grandmother as a young woman, smiling and full of life. Her grandmother had given her this locket on her 16th birthday. "This will always remind you that you come from strong women," she had said. "Women who never gave up, no matter how hard life got." Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. She had worn this locket every day since then. It was the only thing that connected her to her family, to happier times. But now, it might be the only thing that could save her from a fate worse than poverty. She had heard the older women in the neighborhood whisper about the workhouse. It was a place where people with no money and no family ended up. They said once you went there, you never came back the same. The thought of spending her life in such a place made her feel sick. Eleanor sat down and pulled out the newspaper she had been reading for days. She had already memorized the words in the advertisement that caught her eye. Opportunities in the West, Colorado Territory needs seamstresses, cooks, and domestic workers. Good wages and a chance for a new life. The words seemed to glow on the page. She had never been further than 2 blocks from her neighborhood. The idea of traveling across the country to a place she had never seen was terrifying. But what choice did she have? Stay here and end up in the workhouse, or take a chance on something unknown? Eleanor stood up and walked to the window again. The snow was falling harder now, and the street below was empty except for a few people hurrying to get out of the cold. She thought about all the stories she had heard about the West. Some people said it was a land of opportunity, where anyone could make a new life. Others said it was dangerous and wild, no place for a young woman alone. But what if the stories about opportunity were true? What if she could actually make something of herself out there? The thought made her heart beat faster with something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. She grabbed her coat and stepped out into the cold Philadelphia air. The pawnshop was only a few blocks away, but the walk felt like the longest of her life. With each step, she felt the weight of what she was about to do. This locket was all she had left of her family, of her past. Once she sold it, there would be no going back. The pawnshop was warm inside, but Eleanor still felt cold. The man behind the counter looked at her with tired eyes. He had probably seen hundreds of people just like her, forced to sell their most precious belongings just to survive. "I need to sell this," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. She placed the locket on the counter, and it made a small, clicking sound against the wood. The man picked it up and examined it carefully. He opened it, looked at the picture inside, then closed it again. "It's good quality," he said. "Real gold." I can give you $15 for it. $15. Eleanor's heart sank. She had hoped for more, but $15 was exactly what she needed for a train ticket to Colorado Territory. It was like the universe was telling her this was meant to be. "I'll take it," she said quickly, before she could change her mind. The man counted out the money and handed it to her. Eleanor felt the coins in her palm, warm and heavy. This was it. This was her chance at a new life. She walked straight to the train station, her heart pounding with each step. The building was busy with people coming and going, carrying bags and saying goodbye to loved ones. Eleanor had no one to say goodbye to, which made her feel both sad and free at the same time. "One ticket to Colorado Territory," she told the man at the ticket counter. He looked at her with concern. "That's a long journey, miss. You traveling alone?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, sir, I am." He handed her the ticket and pointed toward the platform. "Train leaves in an hour. You sure about this?" Eleanor looked at the ticket in her hand. It was a small piece of paper, but it represented everything: her future, her hope, her chance at something better. "Yes," she said, and for the first time in weeks, she meant it. She found a seat by the window and watched as the train filled with other passengers. There were families with children, businessmen in fine suits, and other women who, like her, seemed to be traveling alone. She wondered about their stories. What had brought them to this moment? As the train began to move, Eleanor watched Philadelphia disappear behind her. She saw the buildings getting smaller, the streets she had walked her whole life fading away. Part of her wanted to cry, but another part felt excited about what lay ahead. She didn't know what waited for her in Colorado Territory. She didn't know if she would find work or friends or even a place to sleep. But she knew one thing for certain: she was finally taking control of her own life. The train picked up speed, and Eleanor settled back in her seat. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what her new life might look like. Maybe she would work in a nice shop or for a kind family. Maybe she would make friends with other women who, like her, were brave enough to start over. What she couldn't imagine was that in a small town called Silver Creek, a quiet cowboy named Jacob Morrison was also dreaming of something better. He didn't know that his life was about to change forever, just as Eleanor's was changing with each mile the train traveled west. The train whistle blew loud and sharp as Eleanor stepped off onto the wooden platform. Her legs felt shaky after 3 days of travel, and the bright Colorado sun made her squint. She looked around at Silver Creek and her heart sank. This was not what she had imagined. The town was small, much smaller than she had expected. Dust covered everything: the buildings, the horses tied to posts, even the people walking by. There were no paved streets like in Philadelphia, just dirt roads that looked like they would turn to mud when it rained. The buildings were mostly made of wood, and many of them looked like they had been built in a hurry. Eleanor picked up her small carpetbag and walked toward what looked like the main street. She could hear piano music coming from a saloon and men's voices talking and laughing. The smell of horses and dust filled her nose. This was nothing like the newspaper advertisement had described. She stopped a woman carrying a basket of vegetables. "Excuse me, ma'am. Could you tell me where I might find work as a seamstress?" The woman looked at her with kind but tired eyes. "Oh, honey, you just missed it. Mrs. Patterson hired a seamstress about 2 weeks ago. She came in on the train just like you." The woman shook her head. "I'm sorry, dear. There's not much call for sewing work in a town like this." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. The seamstress job was the whole reason she had come here. Without it, she had no plan, no way to make money. She thanked the woman and continued walking down the street. Trying not to panic, she found a small boarding house with a sign that read Mrs. Kelly's Rooms for Rent. The building was old but clean, with flower boxes in the windows. Eleanor knocked on the door, and a plump woman with gray hair answered. "I'm looking for a room," Eleanor said, trying to sound confident. Mrs. Kelly looked her up and down. "Well, you look like a decent girl, but I'm afraid all my rooms are taken. Got minors staying here, and they pay well. You might try the hotel, but that's expensive." Eleanor's heart sank even further. She walked to the hotel, a two-story building that looked fancy compared to everything else in town. The man at the front desk told her a room would cost $2 a night. She only had $3 left from her train ticket money. She sat down on a bench outside the hotel, feeling lost and scared. What was she going to do? She had no job, no place to stay, and hardly any money. The sun was starting to set, and she could see men coming out of the mines, their faces black with coal dust. They looked rough and tired, and Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter around herself. Just then, a man with a white apron walked up to her. "You look like you might need some help, miss." Eleanor looked up at him. He had a kind face and gentle eyes. "I'm looking for work," she said. "I was told there might be opportunities here. Well, you're in luck. I'm Frank, and I run the restaurant down the street. My cook quit yesterday, and I need someone to help serve meals and clean up. It's hard work, but it pays fair." Eleanor felt a wave of relief wash over her. "I'll take it, sir." "I'm a hard worker, I promise," Frank smiled. "Good, you can start tomorrow morning. There's a small room above the restaurant you can use. It's not much, but it's clean and dry." Eleanor wanted to cry with gratitude. She followed Frank to the restaurant, which was called the Silver Spoon. It was a simple place with wooden tables and chairs, but it smelled good, like beef stew and fresh bread. The room upstairs was tiny, with just a bed, a small table, and a window that looked out over the main street. But it was hers, and that was all that mattered. The next morning, Eleanor started work before the sun came up. She swept the floors, wiped down tables, and helped Frank prepare food. When the restaurant opened, men began coming in for breakfast. They were miners, cowboys, and shopkeepers, all hungry and ready to start their day. Eleanor had never worked in a restaurant before, but she learned quickly. She carried heavy plates of food, poured coffee, and tried to remember who ordered what. The men were mostly polite, though some of them stared at her more than she liked. What she didn't notice was one man who came in every morning and sat at the same table by the window. He was tall and lean, with brown hair and gentle eyes. He always ordered the same thing: eggs, bacon, and coffee. He ate quietly, paid his bill, and left without saying much. His name was Jacob Morrison, and he owned a small ranch just outside of town. He raised cattle and horses, and he came to town every few days for supplies. But lately he had been coming in every morning, just to see the new girl who worked at the restaurant. Jacob was a quiet man who had never been good with words, especially around women. He had grown up on a farm back east, but when his family lost their land, he had come west to start over. He had been alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to want someone's company, but something about Eleanor made him feel different. Maybe it was the way she smiled at the customers, even when she was tired. Maybe it was how she never complained, even when men were rude to her. Or maybe it was just that she looked like she didn't belong in this rough town. But she was trying her best to make it work. Eleanor began to notice Jacob after a few weeks. He was different from the other men who came in. He was clean and well-dressed, and he always said please and thank you. He never stared at her like some of the others did, but she could feel him watching her sometimes. One morning, Jacob came in later than usual. The restaurant was almost empty, and Eleanor was cleaning tables. She walked over to his table with a cup of coffee. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison," she said. She had learned his name from Frank. Jacob looked up, surprised that she knew his name. "Good morning, Miss ... He realized he didn't know her name. "Eleanor," she said, setting down his coffee. "Eleanor Hartwell." "That's a pretty name," Jacob said, then immediately felt his face turn red. He wasn't used to talking to women, especially pretty ones. Eleanor smiled. "Thank you. Are you ready to order?" Jacob nodded and asked for his usual breakfast. As Eleanor walked away, he watched her move gracefully between the tables. She worked hard, and he could see that she was tired, but she never seemed to lose her gentle manner. Over the next few weeks, Jacob began to look forward to his morning visits to the restaurant more than anything else in his day. He would sit at his table, drink his coffee, and watch Eleanor work. Sometimes she would smile at him, and it would make his whole day brighter. Eleanor started to notice things about Jacob, too. She saw that he always left a good tip, even though he didn't have to. She noticed that he was polite to everyone, not just her. And she could see that he worked hard too. His hands were rough and calloused, and his clothes were simple but clean. One day, when the restaurant was especially busy, Eleanor was carrying a heavy tray of food when she tripped. The plates went flying, and food scattered all over the floor. She felt her face turn red with embarrassment as the other customers stared at her, but Jacob was already on his feet, helping her clean up the mess. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "I'm fine," Eleanor said, feeling grateful, but embarrassed. "I'm so clumsy." "You're not clumsy," Jacob said quietly. "You're just tired. You work too hard." Their eyes met for a moment, and Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The kindness of someone who truly cared about her well-being. As the days passed, Eleanor began to see that Silver Creek wasn't as bad as she had first thought. It was rough and dusty, but the people were generally good. And there was something about the wide open spaces and the mountains in the distance that made her feel free in a way she had never felt in Philadelphia. She was making a new life for herself, one day at a time. And though she didn't know it yet, a quiet cowboy was starting to dream of a future that included her in it. The autumn wind was getting colder, and Eleanor could feel it creeping through the thin walls of her small room above the restaurant. She had been working at the Silver Spoon for 2 months now, and her body was getting used to the long days and hard work. But lately, she had been feeling more tired than usual. It started with a small cough that she tried to ignore. She told herself it was just the dust from the street or maybe the smoke from the kitchen stove. But as the days passed, the cough got worse, and she began to feel dizzy when she stood up too quickly. One morning, Eleanor woke up and immediately knew something was wrong. Her head felt heavy and her body ached all over. She tried to get dressed for work, but her hands were shaking so much she could barely button her dress. She made it downstairs to the restaurant, but Frank took one look at her and shook his head. "You look terrible, Eleanor. Your face is white as a sheet." "I'm fine," Eleanor said, but her voice sounded weak even to herself. "I just need some coffee." Frank walked over and put his hand on her forehead. "You're burning up with fever. You need to go back to bed right now." Eleanor wanted to argue, but she felt so weak that she could barely stand. Frank helped her back upstairs and made her lie down. "I'll bring you some soup later," he said. "Just rest." For the next 3 days, Eleanor lay in bed, drifting in and out of sleep. Her fever made her have strange dreams about Philadelphia, about her grandmother, about trains that never stopped moving. She could hear the sounds of the restaurant below, but they seemed far away. What Eleanor didn't know was that Jacob Morrison was worried sick about her. When he came to the restaurant on the first day and didn't see her, he asked Frank where she was. "She's got a bad fever," Frank said, looking tired. "I'm trying to take care of her, but I've got this whole place to run by myself." Jacob didn't say anything, but that afternoon he came back with an armload of firewood. "For her room," he said simply, "so she can stay warm." The next day, Jacob appeared again, this time with a bag of supplies from the general store. He had bulk medicine, fresh bread, and honey. "My mother always said honey helps with fever," he told Frank. Frank looked at him with surprise. "That's mighty kind of you, Jacob. You don't have to do all this." Jacob's face turned red. "I just want to help," he said quietly. For the next 2 days, Jacob kept coming back. He chopped wood for the restaurant stove, carried heavy bags of flour and sugar, and even helped Frank serve customers during the lunch rush. He never asked to see Eleanor, but Frank could tell he was hoping for news about how she was doing. On the 3rd day, Jacob came in carrying a small bunch of wildflowers. They were yellow and purple, and he had picked them from the field near his ranch. Could you put these in her room?" he asked Frank. "So she has something nice to look at when she wakes up," Frank smiled. "You're sweet on her, aren't you?" Jacob's face turned even redder. "I just think she's a good person," he said. "She works hard and she's kind to everyone. She deserves to have people care about her." When Eleanor finally woke up on the 4th day, her fever had broken. She felt weak, but much better. The first thing she noticed was the small bunch of flowers on her bedside table. They were wilted now, but they still smelled sweet. "Where did these come from?" she asked Frank when he brought her some soup. Frank smiled. "A friend brought them, someone who was worried about you." Eleanor looked at the flowers and felt a warm feeling in her chest. No one had brought her flowers since she was a little girl. She couldn't imagine who would have done such a kind thing. When she finally felt strong enough to come back to work, Eleanor was amazed at how clean and organized everything was. The woodpile was bigger than she had ever seen it, and there were supplies stacked neatly in the storage room. "How did you manage to do all this while I was sick?" she asked Frank. "I had some help," Frank said with a knowing smile. "Jacob Morrison has been coming by every day. He's been working harder than any employee I've ever had." Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat. Jacob had been helping while she was sick? She thought about the flowers and wondered if he had brought those too. That afternoon, Jacob came in for his usual late lunch. Eleanor was behind the counter, and when she saw him, she smiled brighter than she had in days. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "I heard you helped Frank while I was sick. Thank you so much." Jacob looked embarrassed. "It wasn't anything special," he said. "Frank needed help, and I had time." Eleanor poured his coffee and set it down in front of him. "Frank told me you brought supplies and chopped wood." "That's very kind of you." Jacob stared into his coffee cup. "I was worried about you," he said quietly. "I mean, everyone in town was worried. You're a good person, Eleanor." The way he said her name made her feel something she couldn't quite explain. She had never paid much attention to men back in Philadelphia, but there was something about Jacob that made her feel safe and cared for over the next few weeks. Jacob began to talk more during his visits to the restaurant. He told Eleanor about his ranch, about the cattle he raised, and about how he had come west from Ohio after his family lost their farm. "It was hard at first," he said one afternoon when the restaurant was quiet. "I didn't know anything about cattle or horses. But I learned, and now I have a good life. It's simple, but it's mine." Eleanor listened to him talk, and she found herself looking forward to these conversations. Jacob had a gentle way of speaking, and he always seemed interested in what she had to say too. "What about you?" he asked one day. "Do you miss Philadelphia?" Eleanor thought about it for a moment. "I miss some things," she said. "I miss my grandmother, and I miss feeling like I belonged somewhere, but I don't miss being poor and scared all the time." Jacob nodded. "I understand. Sometimes you have to leave everything behind to find out who you really are." One evening, as Eleanor was cleaning tables after the restaurant closed, she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find Jacob standing there with a small wooden box in his hands. "I made this for you," he said, his voice nervous. "I thought you might need somewhere to keep your things." Eleanor took the box and opened it. Inside was lined with soft blue cloth, and it smelled like cedar wood. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever made for her. "Jacob, this is wonderful," she said, feeling tears in her eyes. "You made this yourself?" He nodded. "I like working with wood. It helps me think." Eleanor ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the box. She could see the care that had gone into making it, every corner carefully sanded, every edge perfectly smooth. "Thank you," she said. "I'll treasure it always." Jacob smiled, and for a moment they stood there looking at each other. Eleanor felt like he wanted to say something more, but he was too shy to find the words. "I should let you get some rest," he said finally. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Jacob." As she watched him walk away, Eleanor held the wooden box close to her chest. She was starting to understand that Jacob Morrison was not just a kind customer who came to the restaurant. He was a man who cared about her, who noticed when she was sick, who thought about her enough to spend hours making her something beautiful. The thought both excited and scared her. She had never had anyone care about her like this before. In Philadelphia, she had been too busy taking care of her father and worrying about money to think about romance. But here in Silver Creek, with Jacob's gentle attention and quiet kindness, Eleanor was beginning to feel something she had never felt before. She was beginning to feel like someone worth caring about, and though neither of them had the courage to say it out loud, The whole town was starting to notice the way Jacob's eyes lit up when he saw Eleanor, and the way Eleanor's face softened. When she talked to him, something was growing between them, something gentle and true. And everyone in Silver Creek was quietly hoping that these two lonely souls would find the courage to reach for the happiness they both deserved. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late November. Eleanor was wiping down tables when Frank walked in with the mail, holding a fancy envelope that looked out of place among the usual bills and supply orders. "This one's for you," Frank sighed, handing her the envelope. "Looks important." Eleanor recognized the handwriting immediately. Her heart started beating faster as she saw the return address, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It was from her Aunt Catherine, her father's sister who lived in the wealthy part of the city. Eleanor's hand shook as she opened the letter. Aunt Catherine had beautiful handwriting, the kind that came from expensive schools and years of practice. Eleanor had only met her aunt a few times, always at family gatherings where Aunt Catherine would smile politely but never stay long. The letter was written on thick, cream-colored paper that smelled like expensive perfume. As Eleanor read, her face went pale. "My dear Eleanor," the letter began, "I was shocked to learn of your father's passing and your current circumstances. I had no idea you were in such difficult straits, or I would have reached out sooner." Eleanor's hands tightened on the paper. Where was this concern when she had been selling her last belongings just to eat? Where was Aunt Catherine when Eleanor had to choose between staying in Philadelphia and heading into the unknown? The letter continued, "I have recently lost my governess, and I find myself in need of someone to care for my two young children. The position comes with a comfortable room in my home, 3 meals a day, and a salary of $20 per month. Most importantly, it would bring you back to civilization, away from whatever rough conditions you must be enduring in that frontier town." Eleanor felt like the floor was moving under her feet. $20 a month was more money than she had ever dreamed of making. And a comfortable room, regular meals, and the chance to return to the world she had grown up in. "I can arrange for your train ticket immediately," the letter went on. "You could be back in Philadelphia within the week. Please send word as soon as possible. Your loving Aunt Catherine." Eleanor sank into a chair, the letter still in her hands. She read it again, then a third time, trying to make sense of her feelings. This was everything she had dreamed of when she first arrived in Silver Creek. A real job, good pay, and a chance to go back to the life she understood. But why did the thought of leaving make her feel so empty inside? Frank noticed her expression. "Bad news?" he asked gently. Eleanor shook her head. "No, it's good news, I think." She folded the letter carefully and put it in her apron pocket. "I need to think about something." The rest of the day passed. In a blur, Eleanor served customers and cleaned tables, but her mind was far away. She kept thinking about Philadelphia, about brick buildings and paved streets, about libraries and theaters and all the things she had missed. But she also thought about Silver Creek, about Frank's kindness and the way the regular customers had become like family, about her small room above the restaurant and the view of the mountains from her window, about the wooden box that sat on her bedside table, made by careful hands that wanted to give her something beautiful, that evening as Eleanor was locking. Up the restaurant, she saw Jacob walking down the street. He was heading home from his ranch, and he looked tired but content. When he saw her, his face lit up with that gentle smile she had come to treasure. "Good evening, Eleanor," he said, tipping his hat. "How was your day?" "It was complicated," Eleanor said, surprised by her own honesty. Jacob looked at her with concern. "Is everything all right?" "You look troubled." Eleanor hesitated. She had been thinking about Jacob all day, wondering what he would say if he knew about the letter. Part of her wanted to tell him everything, but another part was afraid of what she might see in his eyes. "Would you like to take a walk?" she found herself asking. "I could use some fresh air." Jacob nodded immediately. "I'd like that very much." They walked slowly down the quiet street, past the saloon where piano music drifted out into the night, past the general store with its darkened windows, past the church with its simple wooden cross. "Jacob," Eleanor said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." Do you ever think about going back east? Back to where you came from? Jacob was quiet for a moment. I used to, he said. Especially in the beginning when everything was so hard and I didn't know if I would make it, but not anymore. Why not? Jacob stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, his eyes looked very serious. Because I've learned that home isn't a place, he said. It's where you feel like you belong, where you feel like you matter to someone. Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat. And you feel like you belong here? I do now, Jacob said quietly. I didn't always. For a long time, I was just surviving, just getting by day after day. But recently, I've started to feel like I have a reason to build something lasting, like I have something worth working for. Eleanor looked at him, and she could see something in his eyes that made her feel warm and nervous at the same time. What changed? She asked softly. Jacob looked down at his hands, then back up at her. You came to town, he said simply. And suddenly everything felt different. Suddenly I wanted to be better, to do better, to have something to offer. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Number one had ever made her feel like she mattered so much. Jacob, she whispered, I got a letter today. She pulled the letter from her pocket and handed it to him. Jacob read it carefully, his face growing more serious with each line. When he finished, he folded the letter and gave it back to her. That's a wonderful opportunity, he said, but his voice sounded strained. Is it? Eleanor asked. I don't know what to think. Jacob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I can't tell you what to do, Eleanor. That wouldn't be fair. But I can tell you what my life was like before you came here. He started walking again, and Eleanor fell into step beside him. I had my ranch, Jacob continued. I had my cattle and my horses. I had a roof over my head and food on my table. But I was lonely, Eleanor. So lonely that sometimes I would go days without talking to another person. I told myself that was enough, that I didn't need anything more. They had reached the edge of town now, where the road stretched out toward Jacob's ranch. The mountains loomed dark against the star-filled sky. Then you came, Jacob said, and everything changed? Suddenly I had a reason to come to town every day. Suddenly I cared about how I looked, how I talked, whether I was good enough. You made me want to be the kind of man who deserved someone like you. Eleanor stopped walking. Jacob. He turned to face her, and she could see the pain in his eyes. I know I'm not much, he said. I'm just a cowboy with a small ranch and rough hands. I can't offer you fancy dresses or theater shows or the kind of life you had back east. But I can offer you something else. What? Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. I can offer you a home, Jacob said. Not just a place to live, but a real home with someone who thinks you're the most amazing person in the world. Someone who would spend every day of his life trying to make you happy. Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face. You don't understand, she said. You think I'm better than I am. I'm just a poor girl who ran away from her problems. I don't have anything to offer anyone. Jacob stepped closer to her. You have everything to offer, he said. You have kindness and strength and courage. You left everything you knew to start over, and you've made a life for yourself here. You've made friends, you've worked hard, and you've made this whole town brighter just by being in it. But the letter, Eleanor started. The letter is offering you security, Jacob said. And you deserve security. You deserve comfort and nice things and an easy life. I can't give you those things, at least not right away. All I can give you is a promise. What kind of promise? Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. Even in the moonlight, Eleanor could see it was a simple silver ring. I made this for you, he said, his voice shaking. I've been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the courage to show it to you. It's not fancy, but it's made with love. Eleanor looked at the ring, then back at Jacob's face. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you'll have me, I want to marry you, Jacob said. I want to build a life with you, here in Silver Creek. I want to work hard every day to give you the kind of home you deserve. I want to wake up every morning knowing that I get to spend another day with you. Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Jacob, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, Jacob said. Just think about it. Think about what would make you truly happy. And whatever you decide, I'll understand. Eleanor looked at the ring in Jacob's palm, then at his face full of hope and fear and love. Then she looked back toward town, toward the restaurant and her small room and the life she had built for herself. Two choices lay before her. Two very different futures. And for the first time in her life, Eleanor had to decide not just what was safe, but what would make her truly happy. The answer was starting to form in her heart, but she needed time to be sure. Time to think about what home really meant and where she truly belonged. Eleanor barely slept that night. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. The letter from her aunt sat on the table beside her, next to the wooden box Jacob had made. Two symbols of two? Different lives, two different futures. She thought about Philadelphia, about her aunt's big house with its fancy furniture and proper meals. She thought about having a steady job, about never having to worry about money again. It would be safe, comfortable, predictable, but then she thought about Jacob's face in the moonlight, the way his voice had shaken when he told her he loved her. She thought about the simple silver ring he had made with his own hands, and the way he had looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Eleanor got up and walked to the window. The sun was just starting to rise over the mountains, painting the sky pink and gold. She could see the main street of Silver Creek below, quiet and peaceful in the early morning light. This rough little town had become home to her in a way she never expected. As she watched, she saw Jacob walking down the street toward the train station. He was carrying a small carpet bag and walking slowly, like a man with a heavy heart. Eleanor's stomach dropped. Was he leaving town? She quickly got dressed and ran downstairs. Frank was already in the kitchen, starting breakfast. Frank, did Jacob say anything to you about leaving? Eleanor asked breathlessly. Frank looked up from the eggs he was cooking. He came by about an hour ago. Said he was going to Denver for a few days to buy some cattle. But he looked like a man who'd lost his best friend. Eleanor felt her heart sink. Jacob was leaving because of her, because he thought she was going to choose Philadelphia over him. She had to stop him, had to tell him she needed more time to decide. She ran out of the restaurant and toward the train station. Her feet slipped on the dusty road and she nearly fell twice, but she kept running. She could hear the train whistle in the distance. Getting closer, when she reached the station, she saw Jacob sitting on a bench, his bag beside him. He looked up when he saw her running toward him, and his face filled with surprise. "Eleanor? What are you doing here?" "You can't leave," she said, breathing hard from running. "Not yet. I haven't decided anything." Jacob stood up slowly. "I'm not leaving permanently," he said. I thought it might be easier for you to make your decision if I wasn't around. I don't want to pressure you." The train was getting closer now, and Eleanor could see the black smoke rising from its engine. She looked at Jacob, then at the train, then back at Jacob. "I don't want it to be easier," she said suddenly. "I want to make the right choice, not the easy one." Jacob's eyes searched her face. "What do you mean?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "I mean, I've been thinking about what you said last night. About home not being a place, but where you feel like you belong." The train pulled into the station with a loud screech of brakes. Other passengers began boarding, but Jacob didn't move. "And?" he asked quietly. Eleanor looked at the train, then pulled her aunt's letter from her pocket. Without saying a word, she tore it in half, then in half again, until it was nothing but small pieces of paper scattered on the ground. "I belong here," she said, her voice growing stronger. "With you. In this dusty little town that's become more of a home to me than anywhere I've ever lived." Jacob's face lit up like the sunrise. "Eleanor, are you sure? I don't want you to regret this later." "I'm sure," Eleanor said, taking his hands in hers. "I was poor in Philadelphia, and I was scared and alone. Here, I may not have much money, but I have something I never had before. I have someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I can give them." Jacob pulled the simple silver ring from his pocket. "Does this mean It means yes, Eleanor said, her eyes filling with happy tears. Yes, I'll marry you, Jacob Morrison. Jacob slipped the ring onto her finger, and even though it was simple, it felt more precious than any jewelry she had ever imagined. It fit perfectly, like it had been made just for her. The train conductor called out, "All aboard!" But Jacob didn't even look at the train. "I guess I don't need to go to Denver after all," he said, picking up his bag. Eleanor laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "What were you really going to do there?" Jacob looked embarrassed. "I was going to see if I could find work. I thought maybe if I could make more money, I could offer you a better life. I thought maybe that would be enough to make you stay." "Jacob Morrison," Eleanor said, standing on her tiptoes to look him in the eye. "I don't need a better life. I need you." They walked back to the town hand in hand, and Eleanor felt like she was floating. The sun was fully up now, and Silver Creek was coming to life. She saw Mrs. Kelly sweeping her porch, and the woman waved and smiled when she saw them together. When they reached the Silver Spoon, Frank was waiting outside with a huge grin on his face. "Well?" he asked, looking at their joined hands. "We're getting married," Eleanor said, holding up her hand to show the ring. Frank whooped and pulled them both into a big hug. "It's about time. I was starting to think you two would never figure it out." "You knew?" Eleanor asked, surprised. "Honey, everyone in town knew. Jacob's been in love with you since the day you arrived. And you've been looking at him like he hung the moon for weeks now." Eleanor felt her face turn red, but she was too happy to be embarrassed. "When should we have the wedding?" she asked Jacob. "How about next weekend?" Jacob said. "I don't want to wait any longer than I have to." "Next weekend it is," Eleanor agreed. Word spread quickly through Silver Creek, and by that evening, the whole town was talking about the wedding. Mrs. Kelly offered to make Eleanor's dress, and the preacher said he would be honored to perform the ceremony. Even the men from the saloon said they would help decorate the church. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. Eleanor had never felt so surrounded by love and support. In Philadelphia, she had been alone in her struggles. Here she had found a whole community that cared about her happiness. On the morning of the wedding, Eleanor stood in front of the small mirror in her room, wearing the beautiful white dress Mrs. Kelly had made. It was simple but elegant, with tiny flowers embroidered on the sleeves. She thought about her grandmother's locket, the one she had sold to buy her train ticket west. She missed it, but she realized she didn't need it anymore to remember that. She came from strong women. She had become a strong woman herself. The church was full of people when Eleanor walked down the aisle. She saw Frank beaming in the front row, Mrs. Kelly wiping away tears, and all the regular customers from the restaurant smiling and nodding their approval. But all she really saw was Jacob, standing at the altar in his best suit, looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Eleanor barely heard the words. She was too busy looking at Jacob, at the man who had loved her quietly and patiently, who had shown her kindness when she needed it most, who had made her feel like she was worth something. When it came time for the vows, Jacob took her hands and spoke from his heart. "Eleanor, I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. I promise to work hard to give you the home you deserve. I promise to be the kind of man who's worthy of your love." Eleanor felt tears on her cheeks as she spoke her own vows. "Jacob, I promise to stand by you through good times and bad. I promise to help you build the life we both dream of. I promise to love you with all my heart, today and always." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the whole church erupted in cheers. Jacob kissed Eleanor gently, and she felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The wedding party moved to the restaurant where Frank had prepared a feast. There was music and dancing and laughter that lasted late into the night. Eleanor danced with Jacob under the stars, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. As the last guests were leaving, Jacob took Eleanor's hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Morrison?" Eleanor smiled at the sound of her new name. "I'm ready." They walked together to Jacob's ranch, to the home that would now be theirs. It was a simple house, but it felt like a palace to Eleanor. It was filled with love and hope and the promise of a future they would build together. Later that night, as Eleanor lay in Jacob's arms, she thought about the choice she had made. She had given up security and comfort to follow her heart. She had chosen love over safety, adventure over certainty, and as she drifted off to sleep, listening to the sound of Jacob's breathing and feeling the warmth of his love surrounding her, Eleanor knew she had made the right choice. She had found her home at last, not in a place, but in the heart of a good man who loved her exactly as she was, the girl who had sold her last belonging for a ticket. West had found something more precious than gold. She had found love, true love, and a future brighter than any she had ever dared to dream.